Well, based on the definition that I've come to experience about aloha, it was something that was around us all the time. It wasn't until you had to put a word and a connection to say, oh, when you say this, you mean that. So I would really say, I don't know that someone taught me aloha. I don't know that we can teach aloha. I think you can learn it. But how? Again, through lived experiences. So in my own family, our ohana, my grandmothers, who were brought up in the culture, but during a time of transition, so they spoke the language. They heard their parents, their grandparents. So they were fully immersed in that. But they came at a time as we transitioned from kingdom, territory to state. So they didn't want to share the language part or even some of the basic, because we needed to assimilate to be part of this new experience and to be successful there. This is old stuff, new stuff. But even in the way they did that, they were demonstrating aloha. In fact, rarely was the word used. But what we engaged and experienced was the giving and the receiving, the reciprocity of opening one's home, caring for you, the way they treat you, their demeanor. All of that was the extension of aloha. And it wasn't until later on when I got into the profession of speaking and sharing and mentoring and teaching that people ask, well, what is this thing called aloha? Because it became such a commodity item in our industry, right? We're sitting here in Waikiki, the aloha state where we sell aloha, which is a contradiction in terms almost, right? But when you look at aloha with all of the various meanings, it's about leaving people whole, being in peace, being in harmony, being pono, all of these various things, that when you are one, you become all these other things. It was a way of being, and my kupuna lived that way. These teachers that mentored me, they lived that way. So they were always demonstrating aloha. The principles that they shared were ways of explaining it and expressing that, but they were, above all, demonstrating what aloha is, even when they were stern, because even that is aloha. To protect you from yourself, right? To protect you from injury or harm, to let you fall into a hole, that's not aloha. Right? To grab you by the ear and pull you, which to an outsider may seem rather gruff, that's aloha. Right? At the same time, the principles of aloha that are used in the commercial marketing space have been aligned, if you would, with customer service. There's a metric of success. Say hi, smile, and you're rewarded. There's a reward system. So aloha has been put into that category. You're rewarded by these things when you behave this way, rather than living this way because that's just the way to be. No expectation. This is what people talk about. To give freely. Not free. To give freely. Without expectation. But knowing that when you do, you've made a contribution of planting a seed, nurturing it, that one day someone will eat the fruit of the tree that you planted. It may not be you. But if others like you are planting seeds in advance of your arrival, you will eat too, because of their aloha. You see, it's not a transaction where I do this and I get something back. That's where we've maybe lost the understanding of giving and receiving as an immediate response. I'll give this to you, you give this to me. Well, that's transactional. That's because we look at it through that Western transactional mind to try to understand in thought this thing called a feeling. The feeling of aloha. Trying to teach someone to think that feeling. So there's a very strong distinction in my mind and heart that you can think aloha, but you may not behave aloha, right? Because there's a disconnect. And so this principle of aloha is much bigger. It is a way of being. So I say the way of aloha. Right? And that will lead to the aloha way. And it's much bigger than what most of us ever even begin to imagine. It's like God, you know? The minute you try to explain how big God is, it gets bigger the instant you try. So too with aloha.
What you've created in your life or currently or in the past of how you live as a kumu, or some of the ways that you have also been the teacher?
Good question. The term kumu is really resource. We've attached it to professor, to teacher, but it's about resource. Which means not source. Some people forget. So while I may be a source of information for others because they've had no access, I'm just a resource because I'm accessing this content and information and sharing it with them. Much like a pond that's connected to a spring. The pond doesn't care who comes and drinks. Doesn't even care where it goes from that point. But if it disconnects from the spring, it can no longer be a pond that serves its community. Kumu is like that. We have a responsibility for the content. Is the pond clean? We also have a certain responsibility of how we feed gets utilized. So there's some discernment that comes with that. But we don't question the source. We connect to the source. This is kumu. So through the disciplines and training in Ho'oponopono, Lua, Ike Aloha, all these various things from these kupuna I've now mentioned, becomes a greater awareness. And we recognize then that it's not when you're standing in front of a room, right? Or behind the dais, and it's always. Because the children are always watching. You never know who's watching. Every word, every movement, every gesture is information. And it would be disingenuous to speak in a room about the virtues and values of aloha, to walk out of the room and behave in contradiction. So it's not a performance, it's a way of being. If you're not that thing, then you are a contradiction. There's no integrity. So if anything, my sense of integrity is what's critical, is to maintaining integrity. Not holding it, am I being in integrity, but just being that. And setting up a life, a set of conditions that is always reminding you when you're out of integrity. This is pono ole. When you're in the absence of what's proper alignment, you're reminded. The world tells you, right? If you're paying attention. Now this is requiring you to be a little more centered in self and a little less self-centered. And if anything, the guidance of these elders are the ones that shared that with me. Because they themselves never took themselves too seriously, but always were serious about being in self, right? And they were genuine, they were direct, they were articulate, but they're also humble. It was their humility. People knew and recognized who they were, not because of how they stood up in the room and said, I am this to be recognized, but people just recognized that being that. Here is a being who is being precisely who they are, and in that is their integrity. And it was living with that as a reflection that really began to, I think, shape who I am slowly becoming myself, right? Because I have these mirrors to be able to reflect off of and from. And I mahalo them because they were willing to show that to me, as well as put me in front of those mirrors and challenge the assumptions and or the beliefs. Well, sometimes we believe stuff in ourselves, but it isn't until they reflect back. So I have to aloha them and mahalo them, because the Kumu ship, as someone would say, it's not a title. Some think it is a title, and they're aspiring for the title. It's not something you aspire to. It's something that you're handed. It's a responsibility. I don't claim to be a Kumu. My students give me that title. My elders gave me the title. Oloi Solomon, you're now Kumu Lua. Who am I to walk around and say I'm a Kumu Lua? I can say that because he said that. I have a student who walks up to me and calls me Kumu. Not because I asked them to call me Kumu, but they recognize that's the relationship we have. In that moment, I'm Kumu. Tomorrow, they might be Kumu to me, as my daughter and my granddaughter are Kumu to me. I learn from them, right? So, like aloha, and many of the virtues and values of Hawaii and Hawaiian culture, lived experience, contextual. Today I'm Kumu, tomorrow I'm haumana. I'm learning. And every day I'm Kumu, I'm learning because of the questions that the haumana are asking. So now the student appears when the teacher shows up, the haumana. And it's understanding that. So if there's a way, that is the way, of being in that space. Yeah. It's not the degree from the school. It's the pedigree of those that shared.
You have so many great words. I'm like, oh, wow. I'm just thinking of so many things. I'm like, wow. And not that I need to bring them up, but can my last question, and then I'll bring it up. But how can you talk about how you got connected to JR or Spirit Fest, Kaʻihewalu, and then how it is? I mean, you're here today, but you were also here last year. So can you talk a little bit about that connection?
Ikahana kaike. In the doing we learn. And it was in doing Ho'oponopono, it was doing a class or workshop that JR and Ryan, whom I've had a relationship with for a while, if anything, because of the ministry, the sharing, that relationship brought them to a function that I was doing. And it was shortly before the last event. So I was invited to be here and participate. But on the spiritual level, it was the kupuna. Their teachers, my teachers, all working in cahoots. We have to bring this information forward. So it is our ancestral relationships, our karmic ties, if you would. I wouldn't be so bold to say that I taught a class and they came and learned and they invited me. Ole. I really believe that the kupuna were saying, okay, here are these opportunities. Let's create these spaces and opportunities. And that's what led to here. Yeah. JR and Ryan and Kauokalani and the connections back to Halimokua. We were in the same spaces, but I never worked directly with him. But now through these multiple connections, not just here, but in other places, that relationship has extended to me as well. But I believe that there's contemporaries to these other kupuna. They're all just on the other side of the veil. And they said, okay, he's got this, she's got that, they got this. Let's build a team. Yeah. So everybody's got their paddles. We're all in the canoe. And it's not a racing canoe, it's a voyaging canoe. A little bit different. And not everyone belongs in the canoe. So right now, it happens to be this crew, which I am grateful for, to be on the crew. Yeah.